All right, how we doing?
Fine.
This is Chasing Skeptics and everything. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Dave Muscato. I'm the Public Relations Director for American Atheists.
For American Atheists. All right. Thank you for letting me do the interview.
Happy to.
I am here in the headquarters of American Atheists in Cranford, New Jersey. We're actually in Mr. Silverman's office, right?
Yes. It's a convenient place for an interview.
So what are the goals and the concerns for the organization?
Well, our main goal is to fight for a separation of religion and government, advocate for the rights of atheists, First Amendment rights to not believe in God and not be discriminated against for not believing in gods. We also fight basically any time religion and government get intertwined, and they're not supposed to be, like when you have creationism or anything religious based being taught in science classes, when you have religious justifications for other types of laws, like for example, if you have politicians fighting against marriage equality, or if you have politicians fighting against comprehensive sex education, if you have politicians fighting against abortion access or birth control access for religious reasons, anything like that, all goes back to separation of religion and government, and that's what we fight for.
All right. Now, you personally, did you grow up with religious parents?
Kind of, not really. I would say my parents are deists, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
On the agnostic side of deist. My mom is a Jewish atheist, I think. She's I think her parents may have kept kosher maybe when she was younger, but I don't know if she ever really believed it. I've never seen her pray or anything like that. I think it's very much more cultural for her. And my dad is a little bit more serious about his background. He grew up Roman Catholic. He went to Catholic school for like K through 12, but he went to a secular college, and he still goes to mass pretty regularly, actually. His mother is 99, I think, and he takes her to mass every week, but I'm not sure that he would go if it wasn't for her. I've not seen him pray or anything in probably 20 years. Yeah, so as I said, my father, semi sort of, not seriously Roman Catholic. I mean, he gives money to Planned Parenthood, so he doesn't take it that seriously. And then my mother, kind of not really Jewish. I have two brothers, and the three of us, they basically encouraged us to learn about this stuff. We actually went to both Jewish Sunday school and Catholic Sunday school back and forth on alternating weeks for years, until we were old enough to start preparing for a bar mitzvah or start preparing for confirmation. And then they said, well, you kind of need to decide which, if either path you want to take. And both of my brothers were not interested in doing either one. I was interested in it, but I didn't have a bar mitzvah or anything like that. I believed in God until I was about 20, and that was as far as I went with it, just as a theist. When I was 20, I was working as a professional musician at the time, and I got a gig working at a non-denominational church, like a mega church type of setting. And just as a bass player, they needed a bass player. It was a last-minute gig, and they liked me, and they asked me to keep playing with them. So I stayed there, playing 4 times a week, 4 different nights, and Sunday mornings, for a couple of years. And I'm kind of ashamed to say it now, but after spending a significant amount of time with those people and in that setting, you just kind of get sucked into it, and I converted to Christianity. I got saved and was born again and all that. Wow. So for about 5 years, I was in that setting, and at one point, basically about 2 years into that process, when I was around 22, I decided if I really was going to make a career out of being a professional worship musician, that I needed to learn more about the religion, because I wasn't really raised hardcore Christian like that. I didn't really know that much about what they taught or what they believed. I had never read the Bible, so I read the NIV, which was the one my church used. a friend of mine told me that the King James is like the more authoritative version of the Bible. So I read the King James, and then I thought, this is kind of silly because there are so many translations. If I really want to know what Jesus taught and what he wanted us to do and how we ought to act and so on, if I was serious about this, I should learn some ancient languages so I could actually read it.
So, wow, so you really put the effort in. Huh?
Yeah. I found a grad student at the classics department at the University of Missouri, where I was living in Columbia, Missouri at the time. And we met a couple times a week for 2 years, and she taught me Latin and Greek, and just learned how to explore this stuff. My goal was to read the original documents so that I could get as close to the source as I could, but I found out pretty early on in that process that that's not physically possible because we don't have those documents. They turned to dust a long time ago or are just otherwise lost to history. What we have are copies of copies made 70 years after the fact by non-eyewitnesses who spoke a different language, who were not from the same geographical area, who were basically writing down oral mythology, and they didn't even try to make the case that this was actually historically true. They were recording these stories. Only one of the 4 Gospels even tells the audience his purpose for writing. The other 3 just launch into a story. The 4th one, this is Luke, he says why he's writing, and he says, I'm writing this for the purpose of recording what happened. I got my information from the elders. Some of them are still alive if you want to go check with them and verify that what I'm saying is accurate. So, he actually tells us why he's writing this and that it's supposed to be true and a history and not just a myth that he's recording. So he gives this great introduction, which, historians love to see stuff like that. It tells us the purpose, it tells us who the author is, and so on. And then it totally switches to almost verbatim copy of Matthew. He just, the rest of it after this introduction is just a copy of the other book. So it doesn't really help us that much from a historical point of view. All it really shows us is that somebody basically took Matthew and added an introduction to it. So when I found out that we don't know who wrote these books, except that we do know they weren't eyewitnesses and they were Christians living in a community of Christians speaking a different language in a different area, it was very clear to me that these were not reliably historical documents that told me, what Jesus actually said, or even that Jesus actually said these things at all, let alone verbatim. And the whole idea that we can take what he taught word for word, these people who take the Bible literally, that's just ridiculous because it's written later. It's not, if you even try to write down, exact word for word phrases of something that I just said 2 minutes ago in this video, you're not going to be able to do it. That's just not how human brains work.
I give a summary, but
yeah, sure. You can get it close, but if we're talking 70 years later, no. That's just ridiculous. It's not reliable that way. And especially passing through multiple people over generations. So that took me from a Bible-believing Christian to just a Christian. And when I started to think about what else do I believe that, like how much can I trust that these things are accurate versus not accurate, what am I using to separate what I believe from what I think is questionable, I didn't really have a mechanism because I wasn't using the Bible for that anymore. So I started studying secular history as far as what actual secular historians as opposed to Bible scholars had to say, theologians I should say, had to say about it. And that's when I got into Bart Ehrman and David Fitzgerald and Richard Carrier and guys like that, Karen Armstrong. And once I started reading those books, it's very hard to maintain faith in anything. And I became an atheist pretty shortly after that. Once you've read Richard Carrier, you're done. So, for about a year.
Maybe I'll take a look.
Yeah. So I was 24 at that point, and for an entire year, I knew I was an atheist, but I didn't say anything to anybody. My whole life was wrapped up in this. It was my job. All my friends were professional Christian worship musicians or worked at the church, and I wasn't ready to come out and say I'm an atheist. But after a year or more so I couldn't maintain that anymore. It felt so unethical to be one thing on stage and know that I'm spouting total crap that I didn't believe. And so I told my music director that I worked for that I said, I can't do this anymore. I think this is all bullshit, and it's unethical for me to be, spouting this stuff and representing that I believe it. So I resigned, kind of was asked to leave. I would have anyway, but at that point I didn't really know what to do with myself. I could have gone back to playing secular music, but I had developed a strong interest in epistemology and philosophy and in history and some other topics. So I went to college, which I hadn't done before, and studied anthropology. And I did that for part-time and played music part-time just as a job for several years until I basically was offered this job here. When I was in college, I got involved with my school's Secular Student Alliance student atheist group. At first, I just attended meetings and got interested in what they were doing, and then there was an opening for an officer position, and I became the PR director for them, and then the vice president. I started a blog for them, and then that led to a writing internship with the National Secular Student Alliance, which led to this job here. So I actually left school without graduating and moved to New Jersey, and I've been here a year now.
Oh wow, no, that's very interesting. So you did start out as a Christian. So like, was there stuff you liked about Jesus when you were a Christian, and what do you think about Jesus now? I guess what happened in the meantime.
Yeah. I mean, before I read the Bible, I thought Jesus was great. I mean, if you only hear the parts that pastors pick and choose to tell you about, of course you're going to think it's nice, because that's the parts they pick and choose to tell you, or the parts that will get you to stick around and be a good Christian or whatever. If you actually read the thing, he has some ideas that I don't disagree with, as far as being against the turn the other cheek thing, and being charitable, and I mean these ideas are not unique to Christianity by any stretch, but I don't think that they're harmful. But other lessons in Christianity, especially a lot of the stuff that Paul wrote about, as far as women being subservient to men, slaves obey your masters, all sorts of other things that I strongly disagree with. I don't think that the best system of ethics is following orders from divine,
a bad authority figure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because there are circumstances that can't be accounted for that come up, you have to have some other system of actively deciding what works and what doesn't, with changing cultures and changing technology
and what's right, I guess.
Yeah, and just what's right, and culture. I mean, this is what you studied in anthropology and in cultural anthropology anyway. That cultures determine what's ethical and what's not. I mean, what we consider ethical is very different from what somebody 1,000 miles south of here considers ethical, or somebody 5,000 miles east of us considers ethical. It just depends on your culture, and the whole world is becoming more westernized and more uniform in that. I'm not sure that that's such a great thing, but I think that there are multiple ways to be ethical, and I like Sam Harris's approach to this in The Moral Landscape, where he basically says that there are different ways that you can get to the same level of an ethical, moral society, and it's I want to say this. I think we're exploring one path that is useful and good, and it's not exclusively the right one, but I think it's the best one, or I would go by a different system.
Do you think religious people are well intended? You know what I mean? Like, So you have spent time in the church. Do you think that a lot of religious people are trying to do the right thing?
I think most of them are. Probably almost all of them. I think there are some of them who, I mean, I think if people didn't think that they were doing the right thing, that they would not do that. I mean, I think people do what they do because they consider it to be the best choice that they can make. Not necessarily that they think it's a great choice, but I mean, if somebody is treating another person a certain way because they think that that's how they're supposed to treat other people, that doesn't mean that it's right. But I wouldn't necessarily think that they're being malicious for treating someone badly if they think that's what they're supposed to be doing. I do think there certainly are malicious people out there, and there are people who know that what they're doing is unethical and what they're doing hurts people, and they decide to do it anyway. And I don't condone that. But I think the vast majority of religious people are trying to do the right thing by following their religion. I think a lot of them don't really follow it because, to some degree, they know that what it's teaching isn't right. Like, for example, if you actually follow the Bible, you're gonna think that gay people are abominable. It's pretty clear about that. And a lot of Christians today don't believe that. They think that it's okay to be gay, and that that they understand that it's not a choice. They understand that it's morally permissible or a non-issue. And I would say that that's cherry picking. I would say that you're not following your religion, which is fine with me. I think that you shouldn't follow that. But I think that they're trying to do what they think is right. I think religious people get their sense of what's right and wrong from the same source that everybody does, including atheists, which is your conscience. And your conscience can be influenced in what it considers right and wrong based on what you read and what your pastor tells you. But it's also influenced by just your culture generally. And if you live in a culture that tells you that that being gay is okay, or having abortions is okay, or whatever the topic is, using birth control, whatever, then you're going to incorporate that into your ethical system, even if the book that you say that you believe disagrees with that.
So it's very interesting. So the next question, obviously, I'm sure we probably, as we discussed before about looking at things scientifically, but this question is, could a God exist? Like, have you and has the organization ruled that out as a possibility, or is it still a possibility? It's just that it hasn't been proven quite yet.
I mean, I think the chances are so low as that you might as well consider them zero. I mean, the chance that a God exists, I consider it about the same chance that Santa Claus exists. I mean, we haven't technically disproven Santa Claus. If Santa Claus landed on my roof, then I would believe in Santa Claus.
With all reindeer.
Sure. I mean, if it happened, then sure. But when we're talking about, like the God of the Bible, I think we can clearly rule out the existence of that God, because that God has contradictory properties. He's supposed to be, it says in the Bible that, in the Old Testament, in many cases, people directly interact with God, have spoken with him, have talked to him. There's a scene where someone wrestles with him. In the New Testament, I can't remember where exactly, but John something says that no one has ever seen God. And it's like, okay, well... and there are other things that are just, it's obviously mythology. I think it's obviously made up.
Oh, certainly. Stuff like Noah's Ark and things like that.
Well, not just that, but the whole story, the whole beginning of it, as far as, in the beginning, God, created everything. That's just, it's oral mythology that was recorded. It's no different than the Greek myths that were, that said thousands and thousands of myths, and they're all invented, and I think that's very, very clear. If you're talking about, like, the unexplained energy source that started the Big Bang, I mean, if you want to call that God, then it's harder to say that God can't exist, or that I'm certain that God doesn't. But I think that when you get to that point of saying we're defining God as the unknown, whatever physics something or other that we haven't just been able to explain yet that caused the universe to start, now we're getting so far away from a useful definition of God that a definition that all of us understand when we think of a God. I don't think that that's useful anymore. I think we're just using it as a placeholder for physics we haven't figured out.
Yeah, how about a spirit that sent the Big Bang into motion? Definitely not the God of any of the religions, but maybe a spirit that, like, for example, Richard Dawkins says he's bothered when people worship the God of the Bible, but he doesn't care if you worship some spirit that sent the Big Bang into motion.
It doesn't hurt anything, really. I mean, it's a waste of time. It's not productive. And I don't encourage magical thinking, but it doesn't actually hurt anybody directly the way that that gay people are actually hurt by other people enforcing Christianity or Christian beliefs about marriage on them, or about Christian ideas about abortion, enforcing those ideas on people who are not Christian. People are actually hurt by that. And if you just want to privately believe in your own head something, magical, I don't care. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't bother me. I think it's a waste of your time, and I think that it's encouraging you to think in ways that aren't true, which can lead you to make, it can lead you to make some bad decisions if you don't think rationally. But everybody, atheists too, are irrational in certain ways. We all have cognitive biases. Some of us are more rational than others. Some of us believe in supernatural things and some of us don't, but that doesn't necessarily mean that atheists are rational 100% of the time. We're not. I mean, something like, I can't remember the exact number, I'm making this up, but something like 90% of people believe that they're a better than average driver, and that's obviously,
especially not here in Jersey.
Yeah, right. We all think stuff like that, and we all know that we do, and even knowing that we do, we can't help it. And I think that people who believe stuff like that, I think it's kind of a choice. I think faith is a choice, but I think that what you believe is a conclusion based on the evidence that you have and how convinced you are of certain things. I don't think that you can just decide to stop believing something. I think that if you're presented with an argument and that argument clicks with you, then you're going to change your mind. But I don't think that you decide to change your mind. I mean, if I could not right now decide to stop believing that I'm wearing a jacket, I couldn't do that. If somebody were to convince me that I'm in the Matrix and my jacket is actually a computer program and I'm not really wearing one, if they showed me some evidence or made some hugely compelling argument that actually caused my mind to change about that, then I would change my mind. But I don't think that it's something that I decide to do. I think it's something that happens based on what information I have.
Did you ever deal personally with a fear of hell or a punishment for abandoning your religious beliefs?
Not for abandoning it. By the time that it was kind of, I stopped believing simultaneously with that. So when I became an atheist, I stopped believing in hell too. So it didn't worry me about going there for being one. Before I was an atheist, when I did believe in God and hell, I worried about my non-Christian friends, and I felt an obligation to help other people become Christian so that they wouldn't go to hell. And I was worried about that a lot. It was bothersome to me. And I felt the same sort of activism spirit that I have now, as far as wanting to help people. That was a major reason that I became a career activist. I have a strong sense of if you can do something to help other people, you should do that as much as you can. And I could never understand why, if somebody was a Christian, and if somebody really did believe that people who were not Christian were going to hell, how that person could not spend every waking moment preaching. Like, I mean, if you really believe that, you would want to help people, right? I mean, that's why, like, Brother Jed, if you're familiar with him, he's a street preacher. He goes around to college campuses preaching, but he does that like 11 months a year. He's been doing it for 40 years. And that makes sense to me. If you really believe that people are going to go to hell if they're not saved, then why wouldn't you do that too?
So when people preach to you, do you hear them out?
No, I think they're full of crap. I think that they believe it.
So they're not necessarily being dishonest.
No, I think if somebody believes it, I don't think it's worth my time to listen to it, because I understand where they're coming from. I've done this enough that, that I've heard all the arguments that there aren't that many, and I've rebutted them many times, and it's boring. It's I just have better things to do. But I don't blame them for trying, because if you really do believe that you are helping me, I think that that's admirable. I think that it's a waste of your time, because you're not going to change my mind. But I understand what you're trying to do when you preach to me, and I don't think that you should be made to feel like you're doing a bad thing as much as just a useless thing.
Yeah. When we talk about the future, sometimes it seems like things are getting better. Sometimes it seems like things are getting worse. But especially on the particular topic of religious intolerance, I mean, it does seem like there are more critical thinkers, there's more secularism, certainly in the United States, but at the same time, when we look at countries like Pakistan or Iran, certainly when I watch television, it seems like there's a lot more intolerance. Like, do you think things are getting better or worse?
Oh, they're definitely getting better. I think there's no question. Worldwide and in the United States, in 2005, 1% of the population used the word atheist as a self-identifier on survey responses when you asked what religion are you. That was 5% in 2012. So in 7 years, 5-fold increase in the number of people who call themselves atheists. The number of people who are non-religious has jumped significantly. It's now 1 in 5 people, 20% of the population in the United States. For people under age 30, they're called millennials in demographic studies. Millennials, about 1 in 3 are non-religious. This trend is just increasing. I saw another survey. Depending on how you ask the question, you'll get different responses as far as if you're an atheist or not. A lot more people don't believe in God than are willing to call themselves atheists, because there's a stigma against the word. If you ask the question, do you believe in God, you'll get a lower rate of people that say that they do than if you ask the question, are you an atheist, and you just take the difference, because a lot of people who don't believe in God don't call themselves atheists. So depending on how you word the question, and depending on if you count agnostics in with atheists or not, you get different ranges, but somewhere between about 5 and 12%, maybe up to 14, I've seen different numbers, are atheists in this country. And it could actually be higher than that. There are a lot of people, for example, who call themselves Jewish, but they don't believe in God.
Right, it's interesting you mentioned that before.
Culturally with Judaism. And I was just reading today an article about Christian atheists, they're called, who see Jesus as more of a metaphor, the divine side of Jesus as metaphorical, and that he was just a person, which is it's kind of a similar idea actually to Satanism, that Satan is a metaphor. They don't think he was a real person ever, but they see him as a metaphor. Satanists are atheists, Levitian ones anyway. they don't actually worship Satan. I mean, as a supernatural entity like that. Yeah, I mean, if you ask them what religion they are, they're going to say Satanist. They're atheists too. So are Buddhists. So are Christian atheists. So are a lot of Jewish people. So it just depends on how you ask the question. But I mean, yeah, if we're talking about the world getting better overall, people are becoming more secular, which I think is good. They're using more rational thinking and valuing this life more, which is very important. I think if you don't care about this life because your only goal is getting to the next one, that's not just sad, but that's it's pitiful. I mean, this is the only life that we have, and to not care about it because you're looking forward to something else is such a waste. And I feel horrible for people who are deluded that much that they really think that this life isn't worth protecting as much as you can, and living to the fullest because it's not the real one, even though it's the only one. But yeah, I mean, we are seeing a lot more violence, I think, because the way it's covered more. We have, we have a lot of like news type things. We have video of things happening that are violent that we weren't able to get 50 years ago or 100 years ago, because cameras are everywhere nowadays. The technology is much cheaper. Digital stuff, as opposed to actual film, makes it easier. The internet makes it easier to show these images quickly in real time. So I think we are more exposed through news to violence than we were years ago. And because of other technology like more efficient weapons and so on, I think it seems like it. But actually look at statistics of how many people are killed through violence as opposed to other ways, accidents or age or whatever. The number of the proportion of people who die from violent means has gone down commensurately over the years. Fewer people die today from violence than ever before. If you look at hunter-gatherer societies, 1 in 3 men die from another person killing them. Today it's much, much less than that.
Much less, yeah.
Especially in places, like Sweden or Norway or Denmark or Japan or here, but even in places like Afghanistan or Bangladesh, most people by far don't die from violence, and it's getting better. There's a wonderful book called The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker that talks about these details and has all the data showing that we're actually getting much less violent as the years go by as a species.
That's great. Now, when we talk about the possibility of there being an afterlife, and I mean, you seem pretty firm that it's not there. I mean, and of course I don't come into the atheist headquarters saying you can't disprove it. I mean, that's not a good argument. But does it ever seem appealing? Like, for example, say when someone dies younger than we think they should, does the possibility of a heaven that they can live on, does it at least seem appealing?
I mean, I guess it would be a nice thought, I guess. I don't think it's really comforting. I think it makes life... it's not comforting to me because I know it's crap. I mean, I can't be comforted by something that I don't believe is real. In the same way that, if... I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, I've heard people use this one before. I think this is pretty funny. If you've got somebody who's lonely and he wants to date and he can't find somebody to date, and so if he believes that Natalie Portman is secretly in love with him, it might make him happy, but it's not true. And if he knows it's not really true, then it can't really make him happy. It's just a fantasy. If you are in a serious financial trouble, and you believe that you have a Swiss bank account somewhere, how
about a Caribbean one?
or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really cheer you up if you know that you just made that up. And because I don't really believe there's an afterlife, even if I wanted there to be one, it wouldn't make me feel better. But as far as, I think that we have, to my satisfaction, shown that there isn't one. I don't think that that's a question anymore, that there is not an afterlife. And the reason that I say that is because we know what happens to your consciousness when you die. It stops existing, and we can show this. When you have an animal, any animal, whether it's a human or a dolphin or a cow or whatever, there's energy that powers their metabolism, that keeps their body warm and so on. If you destroy a different part of your brain, this area, whatever, you lose the ability to do language. If you destroy this area, you lose the ability to process visual input, whatever. If you destroy every single part of the brain, total necrosis of the brain, you lose everything. It's all just gone. And the energy, it's not like it just disappears. It goes off and it does other things. When you have a dead animal, their body gets cold because the energy that was keeping it hot is now dissipated into the air. The air warms up slightly. The animal gets colder. The energy that was powering their cells, that was making up all of their cells, bacteria eats it, and then the bacteria goes and powers plants, and then other animals eat the plants, and then humans eat the animals. And it's not a mystery where this energy goes. We can track where it goes, and it's not like
is a soul impossible?
I don't think so. That's what I'm saying.
But
it's like
it's not possible, you think?
No, I think if we're talking about I think your consciousness exists in your brain. Consciousness is it's a feature of sufficiently complex brains, and once your brain is no longer sufficiently complex to house thought because it's dead or destroyed, piece by piece or whatever, it's not there anymore. And I think when you're dead, after you die, it's no different than before you were born. It's not like, it's not like magically all of the pieces come back together somewhere else. There's no evidence of that. If we had evidence of that, then I would be willing to look at it.
Do you leave it open that maybe down the road the evidence could come, or,
Sure.
Some people suggest that after we die we have it.
Yeah, if some psychic or whatever medium was able to communicate with somebody's soul and, very strongly demonstrate that they're, in a way that would win the James Randi Prize, show that.
The James Randi
Prize. If we had overwhelming, it would have to be overwhelming evidence. It would have to be stronger evidence than all the evidence we have that shows that this is not the case. If we had overwhelming evidence that consciousness does survive the death of a brain, which every single example we've ever had of consciousness, it existed in a brain. If we had an example that shows that that's a counterexample, then I'd be willing to consider it. But we've never had evidence of that.
Now, so obviously, since we both come from Christian background, well, you also had a Jewish background as well, but you were aware of how perhaps in the Abrahamic religions, if bad people died, they were punished in the afterlife and everything. And obviously, the punishment someone deserves varies, but without there being an afterlife, it kind of seems like someone can commit or do something wrong here on Earth and get away with it. Some people get caught and some don't, but arguably, I think it's the Zodiac killer. He was a serial killer out in California, and he killed people, and they haven't caught him, and that was 20, 30 years ago. Okay. Does it, would it be better if there was judgment in some afterlife or whatever?
I guess it depends on what you mean by better. It would be nice.
Does it bother you that people get away with stuff?
It's the way it is. That's just what happens. People even. I mean, wanting something to be different than it is doesn't change the way it is, and it's called wishful thinking. You know, I mean, it doesn't actually affect things. People, if there was justice for this type of thing, but I think justice is kind of a concept that inherently involves wishful thinking, because there's no guarantee that that is going to happen in the universe. Things just happen the way that they do, and sometimes people get away with stuff. I mean, I think there's this idea that humans are in this like special category that's different from other animals, and we're not. I mean, we're more developed as far as our cognitive abilities. We're the only animals that can do, you know, certain types of things as far as language and so on. But I mean, if you have, you know, two fish, and one of them is you know, caught his lunch, you know, caught a third fish, and he's about to chew it, and then another fish comes along and steals it from him and swims off with it, and that's his lunch now. I mean, that's not fair, you know. But it's not like we expect any cosmic punishment for that fish. It's just, that's how nature works. Sometimes somebody else gets screwed over, and for some reason, when it happens with humans, we think that there's like some magical way that they are going to get cosmically punished. And I'm saying, no, that's just it. Humans are natural too, just like the fish, and sometimes some of us get screwed over because that's just the way nature works. Yeah.
It's interesting, and you know, we're not too far from New York City with September 11th. I mean, this is kind of a similar question, but I do ask, I try to ask this to all of the atheists that I meet, because I had a friend around the time of September 11th who, he and I were talking about the Muslim suicide bombers and how supposedly they believed that they were going to get 70 virgins after heaven or whatever. And, you know, of course I never met them. I don't know if that's really what they thought, but if that was what they thought, because my friend used to say they don't even get a chance to be disappointed. And I used to always ask him, like, don't you wish that something happened where they could be disappointed, you know, where they could learn that either it was wrong or that that's not really going to happen?
If I'm wishing that they would learn that it was wrong, I would wish that they would learn that before they killed a bunch of people.
And themselves.
Yeah, I mean, and themselves too. I feel very bad that so many people, like I was saying before, are deluded like this. And if you're just deluding yourself and you're not doing it in such a way that no one else is harmed by it, I don't think that's admirable or healthy, but I don't think it's harmful necessarily. But if you are deluded in such a way that you are harming other people, whether by flying planes into buildings or you know, scaring your children with hell or something like that, that does affect other people, and that's not acceptable. I think it's unfortunate is not a strong enough word, but it's horrible that those men who did what they did on September 11th, that they didn't know what they were doing, or if they didn't know, I don't know, but they didn't. It seems to me that they probably didn't understand the real effect of what was happening, because they believed some incorrect information about what would happen when they did that. And I think that's a failure of all sorts of things. It's a failure of education. It's a failure of just our ability to reach people and break through that hold that religion has on people's minds. And it's getting better. I mean, I think, like I was saying before, religion is having less and less of a hold on people. But yeah, it's horrible that happened. And I wish that those people had learned what they were doing was going to hurt people in a permanent way, and not gain them anything before they did it.
Yeah, it was pretty terrible. When we talked about the Bible before, and you mentioned that you study the Bible a lot, and what's always confused me is how people sometimes will give credit for their high moral character. They'll give that credit to the Bible. Like, do you agree? Like, they'll say, "Oh, I wait to have sex until marriage because it's in the Bible," or "I do this good thing because it's in the Bible." Now, do you agree that people say that? But of course, the problem is if we read the Bible, as we talked about before, first of all, there certainly is a lot of bad stuff in the Bible. There's killing and such, and I don't recall there being this instruction about do this good thing. I mean, it might have been. So why do you think people will cite the Bible for their good acts and their high moral character?
I think, as an evolutionary strategy, I think that religion helped provide structure for, in a group dynamic sense. I think it's attributed at least to Mark Twain that religion was invented when the first con man met the first idiot or something like that. I can't remember.
The first con man met who?
Met the first idiot or something. I can't remember. But I mean, it's as far as like group dynamics. If you have if you have somebody who's going to beat you up, and you are, say, much smaller than this person, and there's no way that you can defend yourself. You have a couple of options. You can get the pulp beat out of you, or you can say, you can beat me up if you want to, but an invisible guy who's watching us right now is going to punish you someday. And if you can convince him that that's true, then you can avoid getting beat up. And it's awfully convenient that the person who's going to punish the aggressor is invisible, and that this is going to happen someday in the future, because then you don't have to provide evidence for it. And I mean, I think that sort of thing is kind of how these things got started. And then just things that we generally couldn't explain. Humans have a curiosity as far as wanting to understand how things work, and I think that's good. But before we really had a scientific way of thinking down, we didn't have a lot of options, and our options were either to say the truth, which is I don't know, or to make up something that seems plausible without actually understanding or being able to put together why that would be true with evidence and so on. And there is an evolutionary advantage to assuming that you have agency behind things. Like, for example, say you're some animal, millions of years ago, and you see some, like a bush rustling, and there's a couple of explanations for that. It could be wind or something rustling it, or it could be a predator in the bush that's making it move like that. And if you make the assumption that it's just the wind, and you're wrong, you're dead. I mean, you're out of the gene pool. So it makes sense for you, from an evolutionary point of view, to always assume that it's an animal, even if half the time or more you're wrong. Because if by being paranoid about that sort of thing, you keep yourself in the gene pool. So we have a tendency, because of things like that, to assume that things are alive even when there's no direct evidence that they're alive. And when we have things that we can't explain, like lightning and so on, it makes sense to me, before we understood what lightning was, that we would say that it's I mean, if you've ever been to Kansas during a lightning storm, the lightning is really loud. I mean, it's really, really scary if you're right next to where it's happening. And I can totally understand, somebody on the Serengeti millions of years ago, and lightning struck, and they thought that a god was angry at them. It makes sense, because you don't have any other explanation. You don't know how electricity works. Yeah, I mean, I think religion is, it was useful in the past in helping us procreate and organize ourselves and govern ourselves and make up some rules about things. The Old Testament has some instructions for certain things that did keep people healthy. Like, for example, Jewish people don't eat pork. And the reason is because it's against their religion, but you can also get trichinosis from eating pigs. And
they had no way to preserve it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by avoiding that food, it kept more of them alive. And I mean, if you just tell people, hey, don't eat that because you could get sick, and they're starving to death, they're not going to care. But if you tell them, don't eat that because God said so, they're going to listen more.
Because God will be angry.
Yeah.
Seafood too, right? Or
Well, shellfish. But yeah, I mean, it's a way to control people, and before you have efficient governance, it worked. It was one of our early attempts at ethics. It was one of our early attempts at governance. We have better strategies now. The reason it was one of our early ones is because it wasn't the best one. We came up with better ones to replace it. And I think that what we have now, the system that we have now, at least our system of a secular government, is healthier and stronger and better for everybody.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's an improvement.
What should people know about Madeleine Marie O'Hare?
Madeleine Marie O'Hare, I wrote an article about her for International Women's Day last year. The article was about atheist women that are underappreciated. And the reason that I picked her is one of my top 5 for that list was that people who are maybe 40 and older, I would say, know who she is. She was very famous, infamous, you might even say, just because she was, her personality was larger than life. She was a very angry person, from what I understand, but in a passionate, activist way. She not a violent anger, but she had a lot to be upset about, and she was an activist, and that's what activists do, is they have passion. She was not afraid to say true things, even though they piss people off, which is something that I try to do. Which is definitely something that my boss, Dave Silverman, does very well. There's this idea that if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, and that's crap. I mean, if you're trying to affect change, sometimes you need to say things that aren't nice. If you are trying to educate people about things that are not healthy, they might not want to hear it. They might think you're being rude, but it's necessary to say those things. And you're not doing anyone any favors by not talking about them. That's the way that I see it, and that's what we try to do around here. And I feel bad for people whose feelings are hurt, but I don't really care. I'm sorry. I've got more important things to do than worry about your feelings. If I'm trying to make the world a better place, that's not to say that I will intentionally be tactless or intentionally make people feel bad. I don't do that. I'm not a bully. I just have goals that sometimes require being straightforward, and some people don't like that. But Madeleine, she, I mean, I think I feel terrible for the way that her life ended. Nobody should have to go through that, and I would say that about people who make my job very difficult, in addition to the people on my side of things. I mean, even if you're a serial killer, you should not have to go through that when you die.
Yeah, no, I heard about it.
Yeah,
It's
bad.
it's very unfortunate.
But I think she accomplished a lot in her life. Her Supreme Court cases and her contributions to atheism activism and separation of religion and government left a great legacy, I think. And she built American Atheists, which I'm grateful for because that's where I work now. This is the place that I have wanted to work for a long time. Separation of religion and government, the way I see it, is it's really the core of a lot of things that I care about. as far as just different causes that I'm passionate about, I'm very passionate about abortion access and birth control access and LGBTQ rights and I mean a lot of different things. But the reason that I focus on atheism specifically is not just atheism rather, but separation of religion and government, is that all of these conflicts have their core conflict, their core butting head with separation of religion and government. The reason that abortion access is an issue is because of Christians saying abortion is wrong and trying to legislate that. The reason that birth control is an issue with this, you know, the Affordable Care Act mandate. I mean, the reason that this is an issue is explicitly because of religious objections, and they're trying to legislate this.
And their objection is because God says.
Yeah, I mean, it's against their religion, and they don't want to have to make it easy for people, or even possible for people to get birth control. I mean, they're framing it as a religious freedom thing. They're not trying to hide the fact that it's for religious reasons, that they're trying to make it difficult for other people to get birth control. And it's the same thing with, I mean, I think the most obvious example, or clear-cut example, would be teaching creationism in science classes. I mean, in a public school, when you're using tax funding to teach children who are very impressionable and who don't know how to ask critical questions or think, you know, skeptically like that, if you tell them that, you know, God made the earth 6,000 years ago, they'll believe you. They don't know better. And that directly comes from the Bible. And I mean, that's just so obviously a separation of religion and government issue. And I mean, these are all things that I care about, but by focusing on separation of religion and government, I can go after all these different causes at once. It's very efficient. So that's why I wanted to be here and do this. And yeah, it's like killing 20 birds with one stone. And,
well, that's good.
Yeah.
With dealing with death as an atheist, it's interesting because I've spoken to atheists who have said that that's one of the harder things. Like people such as yourself that started out Christian or religious, when someone close to them died, they would think they were going to heaven, but now they have to come, now they have to, for the most part, understand that the person's just gone. Like, how do you deal with that the most comforting way?
Well, I think there's kind of two things I have to say about this. One is that it's just true that you stop existing when you die. And whether I like it or not is not going to change that, so I might as well accept it. I have a general tendency is the way that I approach things in life, that if there's something that I cannot do anything about, whether I like it or not, if I dislike something and I can't change it, then I take it off my list because there's no point in worrying about it. I have other things that I can change that need my attention. With death specifically, I'm kind of in a weird place with that, personally. I used to work at a humane society. I still give money to one. And when I was there, it was part of my job was euthanizing animals. And I've euthanized hundreds and hundreds of cats and dogs. And if you do that long enough, you start to see it as more of just a necessary part of the way that life works. It doesn't really bother you. Not that you like it, of course. You don't see it as a positive thing, but you see it as a necessary thing. And if you have an overpopulation problem with companion animals, which most cities do, you can let them run loose, which is not healthy either. They get hit by cars, they get mauled by other animals, they freeze to death or starve to death. None positive outcomes here. Or you can take them to a shelter and take care of them and make them happy and comfortable, and then put them to sleep. And it's between a rock and a hard place, but it is the lesser of two evils. It's not ideal, but it's a necessary thing to do if you don't want an animal to starve or get mauled or whatever, hit by a car, you know. So that experience of having that, not be upset about things when they die, it's part of this process. My parents also, just by chance, happen to be cancer doctors, and the type of cancers that they work with usually affect elderly people. And just over the course of, 20, 30 years of watching them do what they do, I've been exposed to a lot of people who were going to die. And I've been to a lot of funerals. Some of my parents' patients live, for decades after they've met them, and they become very close. Some of them don't live nearly that long. But, yeah, I mean, I've gotten to know some of them, and it's just, it happens, people age and then they die. And I don't know that I really do anything specific to comfort myself as much as just say I can't do anything about it, and there's not really any reason to be upset about that. That's just the way that things work. And there are other things that I can change that I also don't like, and it's a better use of my time and energy to focus on those things, which is why I'm an activist. So.
Well, at this stage, I allow you to ask me any questions if you wanted, or if you had any.
I guess I'm curious about, because you said that you're not really sure yet as far as if you believe in a God or not. I guess I'm just curious about why you're not sure. Like, what are you still looking for as far as far as why you're not an atheist?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, obviously, up to this point, unless information is being hidden, as people will make the accusation with UFOs or whatever, up to this point, there is not enough evidence to be convinced that there is a God. Now, many atheist activists, including Richard Dawkins and the ones that I met in Texas, will say that, it could still be out there. It could be something we find in the future. Mm-hmm. You seem to be very convinced that we will not. Now, there are scientists like a Ken Miller, for example, who I don't know exactly what his beliefs are. You know who I'm referring to, right? But he believes in God, and part of my plan is to do an interview with him and many other people, but we still don't know how the Big Bang happened.
Yeah.
Now, it has been explained to me that does not mean that we assume a God did it,
right?
But we don't know. It is a very good question. I mean, I'm just me personally, I would prefer that there is a God in an afterlife. Now, it has also been explained to me by many atheists that our preference means nothing, but maybe I don't see it as impossible as you or a few other people do, and I am holding out. I mean, it's hard, especially, the evidence is what it is right now. I mean, I see it as a possibility, but I would have to agree that, it is not proven right now, and I hope that answered the question.
No, it does. Yeah, I mean, I think, the general way I approach it, I haven't ruled out a God either. I need to be specific. I haven't ruled out a God. I've ruled out specific gods because they're logically impossible. Like we were saying earlier, I mean, depending on how you define God, and there are some atheists who they use the term agnostic. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I-G-N-O-S-T-I-C.
No, I'm not actually.
So agnostic means that you hold the position that God, the word God, is so vaguely and inconsistently defined that it's useless to ask the question from a semantic point of view. That if you ask 100 different people what God is, you're going to get 100 different answers. And if you can't even specify what God is, then it doesn't make sense to ask whether you believe in God or not. I mean, if we ask 100 different people, if who Santa Claus is, they're all going to describe pretty much the same thing. They're going to say, it's an old guy with a beard and a red suit who lives at the North Pole, and you can be specific about this stuff because it's a fictional character that has been specified as having certain characteristics. God, people say God is energy, God is love, God is everywhere. God is Mormons believe God is an actual person with a body, which is totally contradictory to people who say that God is a spirit. And it's like, there are so many different ways to approach that question that it really doesn't make sense until we have nailed down what we mean when we're asking the question, is there a God? First we have to know what God, what that word is defining, or what we're defining it as. So I kind of agree with that point of view, that until we can all settle on what we're talking about, it doesn't really make sense to ask if we believe or not. I don't believe in any of those things that I just said. I believe in love, but love is a chemical reaction in your brain, that
could also be an action.
Yeah, I mean, but there's evidence of it. Is my point. It's a natural thing. I mean, when people say, if there's no God, then how do you know that you love your wife? And it's like, I'm not married, but well, because she is nice to me more than other people, and it's like there's evidence.
And I have ruled out. I mean, like I mentioned Noah's. There's a lot of stories in the Bible because I've read the Bible and I've taken religious studies courses. I really don't know how people can believe stuff. I mean, I think some people think you have to believe all the Bible or else they're going to be discredited, but I have no problem saying a lot of the stuff I don't think happened. Yeah.
Well, the question that I have then would be, if you're not taking the whole Bible as literally true, what process or mechanism are you using to decide which parts of it are believable and which parts aren't?
Well, that's very interesting. Again, like someone could believe in God and not, and like even in Christian churches, if you ask people, they will have, like for example, I think it's Quakers say we don't believe any of the Bible, and they just believe that there's a loving God, but most people will believe parts of it and some not, and you can examine it critically. There are historical events that we do believe to be accurate. I think Nebuchadnezzar is mentioned, and he, as far as we know, was a real person. So we can look at things scientifically. We can look at things from a probability stance. Like, for example, with Noah's Ark, that the whole earth was covered in water and that they took all the animals on a ship. I mean, just from probability, that doesn't seem very probable. And, most of it, you can say that there is not I mean, just on what evidence do we have? I mean, maybe if all the grass had evidence that it was, someone once talked about that if Noah's Ark happened, then all the grass should be in a certain situation where it shows evidence of being under intense water or something. I mean, but the whole Bible, just like any other piece of history, we can look at and say how probable is it, what evidence do we have for it, and that's pretty much it, I guess.
Yeah. I guess, I mean,
and religious people do that too,
Sure. I mean, I think most religious people, Abrahamic religions at least, they don't believe all of it. They decide which parts they're going to believe, and I think the process that I see from most people is that they kind of decide based on what they like and what they don't like, and what sounds plausible and what doesn't sound plausible, and what sounds like things that they think are important and things that they think aren't, and things that they care about and things that they don't. Basically, just the same way that I decide what I'm going to believe and not believe. and then they find a church after that that teaches those things that they believe, and that sort of validates it for them. Some people never switch churches, and then they struggle with certain things. They're like, my church teaches X, but I can't believe X. It's hard for me to believe X. And a lot of people, when they face that situation where, they say, my church teaches X, but I can't believe that, so they leave and they find one that doesn't teach X. And it's like, all you're really doing at that point is just looking for somebody to tell you that you're right. It's not really that you're believing the Bible, it's that somebody's telling you what you want to hear. And people tend to move, when they switch churches, they tend to move toward less and less literal, less and less orthodox churches. And I think there's a reason for that. It's because as people start to think and explore and read and learn, they realize that more and more of this is bullshit, and they move away from it toward atheism. It's a progression, from like literal biblical fundamentalism to like cafeterianism, it's called, where you just pick and choose.
Cafeterianism.
Yeah. To like deism, and then to atheism, just depending on how into epistemology and history and so on, how much of that you're aware of and think about and care about it. But I think, different people, decide in different ways what they're going to believe and what they think is important as far as what their religion teaches. I don't know. What I don't understand is, if you're going to start saying, well, this doesn't seem true, and you take one part of the Bible and you're like, this aspect of it doesn't seem right. Once you open that door, and once you say there's something in this book that's wrong, that kind of sets a precedent for everything else in that book. It's like, say I was reading, I don't even need an analogy, I can give you a real example. I was reading this book by Malcolm Gladwell, and I'm trying to remember which one it was.
Just to step in,
sure.
In some sense, science kind of does that, because when we have a theory, and I do have an accurate understanding of a theory is not a guess. It's been peer reviewed. It's pretty much what something is, but at the same time, it's open to being proven wrong, per se.
Yeah, it's as close as it's when we're using inductive reasoning, it's your explanation for something. Yeah.
But you similar to, I guess, my stance on the Bible, like, it is open to being proven wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm saying, once you open that door, right, it just, once you say there are things in here that are questionable, then it makes you wonder about all the rest of it too. And like the Malcolm Gladwell book that I mentioned, like, I was reading one of his books, and he mentioned something about this anthropologist. It's a complicated story, but because I had studied anthropology, I knew that what he was saying was wrong. And this is a well-known problem. It was a paper that was published and it was later retracted. And every person who studies anthropology knows that story. It happened in the 60s. It was a famous example of a paper being retracted. But the fact that he was talking about this original paper without mentioning the retraction, and then he built a whole argument to make a major point in that chapter off of this first paper without apparently even being aware that there was a retraction. When I saw that, I was thinking, like, well, how many other things did he fail to thoroughly research in here? I started thinking, all the other things that he's talking about in this book, I don't think I can trust any of them now, because this one turned out to be.
It's a very good point. But me personally, I'm not sure if there's a God. I think there still could be, but I know that the Bible, I've studied, I know that the Bible was written by people, and more problems than you even mentioned. Like, it's not even just that they were, certainly it's stories that they were hearing 70 years ago and writing down. But even when you wanted a copy of the Bible, you had to, you know, they had no bookstores, they had no printing. You had to actually rewrite the Bible, or you know, and obviously we see error there. Someone could have written something differently. There could have been an error. They could have wrote it the way they wanted.
They did. I mean, we have actual knowledge that they did this stuff. We have you know, copies that are that teach substantially different things, with pieces missing or pieces added, and we have margin notes where you know, somebody will say, "You're not supposed to teach that. That's not what we believe." And it's like, you know, I mean, yeah, we know that kind of stuff happened, and not just they're called voluntary copying errors is when that happens. Yeah, I do a whole lecture about this. It's on YouTube. I'll send you a link later if you'd like.
Oh, that'd be great.
But yeah, I mean, this stuff is way older than, you know, the last couple of decades, as far as people disagreeing about what the Bible really teaches and so on, or what we're supposed to take out of it. That's been going on since the beginning of writing all this stuff, or even compiling it into the anthology that we call the Bible now. I mean, it's 66 books that were put together like that. And there was a huge amount of argument, and continues to be argument today, about the right versions of which of those books are, if those are even the correct ones to put in or not. The Eastern Orthodox Church doesn't use the same Bible that the Catholic Church uses, which isn't the same Bible that Protestant churches use, because they disagree about which books belong in it. Yeah, it's not a question I think is ever really going to be settled, because there's not a right answer. It's made up. There is no official correct version that God gave us. It's man-made. So, yeah.
All right, yeah, well, that concludes the interview. Thank you very much, Dave, for being a part of it.
Happy to.
I'm going to turn the camera off.